I'm going to talk a little bit about the certification process, and then Andrew's going to talk more about the specifics of what we do at the farm, and then we'll kind of round that out with some best practices, recommendations, and time for questions. But we do want this to be informal. We are a small group, so that we would love you to ask questions. You don't need to feel like you need to hold your question. Please ask us so that we can answer that and have a discussion and dialogue, and there's also time for us to have more discussion at the end as well. And especially after we finish, we can eat and mingle and get to know each other a little bit more. That's kind of the hope. So a little bit about myself. I am coming from Houston, Texas for the past 7 years. My partner is from there, but I'm a New Jersey native from Morris County. So I always grew up with gardening. I love sweet potatoes. That is probably my favorite vegetable. It's so versatile, and we talked about yesterday having a sweet tooth, and I definitely have that. So sweet potatoes are my jam. And I'm excited because I've gotten to support farmers across different farms that I've worked at and abroad, and so get to come back and put my roots into the soil, literally, metaphorically, all the ways here in New Jersey. So excited to be with each of you.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Geller. I'm the Student Farm Coordinator at Rutgers Gardens. I'm happy to be here with you all. My role at Rutgers Gardens is really to kind of take care of the farm, the ins and outs, and to kind of oversee the plant care program that we have, make the connections, kind of share my knowledge and experience as a staff person. Also, I love working with students to grow vegetables for the community.
The main reason for us at Rutgers Gardens Student Farm to get certified organic is for an educational tool. We don't necessarily have to get certified organic. We have a relationship with our consumers through a market that's every Friday in our market season. We have a CSA program. Folks know us. They get to ask questions and learn about our growing practices, and we get to educate the students who work with us alongside us on how to do that. But for us, it's important to educate folks on the process of getting certified, and so that's one of our main drivers, and also will increase that consumer trust. If someone doesn't have time to have a conversation with us at the market, they get to see that organic label and know, okay, I understand they're doing this organically, and I trust that. So identify your why to certify. That's my first recommendation. So kind of understand that for some people, it may be that you get increased premium, right? You might be able to sell more, your bunch of organic carrots for more at a market or in a CSA program or wholesale than you would for a conventional carrot. For us, it's the next step was identifying a certification agency. So for most people, there are about 3 agencies that you can find in our region. We are going to be working with PCO, which is the Pennsylvania Certified Organic. And so I'll actually be sharing and passing around some of the documents that PCO has for anyone who's getting certified, so you kind of get a feel for that. But there's also New York, NOFA New York, which is the Northeast Organic Farming Association, and then Bay State, which is, I think, based in Massachusetts and that area. So you want to identify the agency that you can work with, and then you go ahead and request an application. And so we have requested our application. I actually may be talking with the agency tomorrow because we are along the process. So we're sharing our journey with you all. We are not certified organic yet. But Craig, who is one of the inspectors I was speaking with, he said we might be able to do this by June. So that might be really awesome that we could get certified organic this summer. And so for us, the next step is the organic system plan, and that's kind of the bulk of what we're going to talk about today. So if you're really interested, I'm going to pass this around. You can leaf through. It's about a 46-page document just to get an idea of some of the questions that are asked. And we're going to go through and explain some of our practices as a farm that address that organic system plan. I have an average cost on here, about $1,200 a year. It's like an average. It may cost more than that for some growers if you have livestock, if you have a larger operation. This is kind of the number I'm working off the consultant that we got to talk to recently. And then for your time frame, basically I said June might be more realistic. This is a busy time of year. It's about to be for certifying agencies, and so we may be looking at several months between when we have our first conversation and our application submitted to when we actually are certified organic, when an inspector comes out and visits our farm, does a walkthrough, and we're going to talk about some of the things they will do throughout the presentation. So the first kind of thing I wanted to talk about was know your growing area. So you see a couple shots. These are screenshots that we grabbed from our farm operation. And talking here, one of the first sections of the organic system plan is asking about buffer zones and if you know who's adjacent to your field and what they're doing. One thing that you're trying to prevent here is any contamination of your crops. You cannot say a crop is certified organic if there's a conventional grower right next door spraying and there's drift from that pesticide they might be spraying. Now that is on your crop and it's no longer certifiable. And so we luckily do not have an issue like that here at Rutgers Gardens. We are nestled in a 180-acre botanic garden, and we do have lots of entities that come here and do research. We have our horticulture staff that work in our display gardens. So there are other entities that aren't necessarily organic practices, but we do have the buffer zones and areas of our farm kind of mapped out and looking at where we might have weak spots and where we might want to strengthen. So your field maps are going to be really important for this plan. You'll need to have that in labeling. So the one thing you're missing from this image is actually labeling what this is, right? We have a shop here, and these are our farm fields. So this is a lower field. We have 3 blocks there, and then we have our upper field, which is the next image, where you see E. There is another entity called the Daylilier Grower Association. I'm forgetting what the Yeah, they're growing daylilies. They're not doing organic practices, but one of our pieces for organic certification will be having a signed agreement with anyone who is possibly spraying or doing, restricted use of any material. They will sign an agreement that says if they're on site here, they're not going to use those restricted materials. So we have that confidence that they will not. F is where we have our display garden, our annual flower display garden that is taking care of our horticulture team. We have the benefit, those are our colleagues, we work with them, we understand the practices that they have. So it's really important to get to know your neighbors. It does say in the OSP also if you have a neighbor that's not willing to talk to you, does not want to interact with you, there's steps that you can take. If you can't get something signed, you can work within a process to make sure you have that adequate information to supply to your certify agency. And I mentioned the signed agreements if needed. So for us, it's kind of identifying these couple spots where there may be research down by C. That is where there is research on dogwoods and hazelnuts. Is that correct? And so we want to probably have more conversations as we're getting serious about the certification now to make sure we understand, are they spraying along that fence line? Because that might affect that very low block of block 3, any of the crops planted there. We just want to make sure there's no possibility for contamination or drift of a chemical that they might be spraying that's a restricted substance for organics. So yeah, any questions with kind of buffer zones and thinking about your adjacent fields or anything like that? Okay. Yeah.
Do they take into account water, like runoff?
Yes.
Aerial drift?
Yes, it is both. And so water, sometimes they require actually an annual water test so that you are monitoring, or they want to understand how well you're monitoring for those issues. So water contamination is definitely one of them, as well as any residue like aerial drift, yeah. So next we want to talk about seeds and planting stock. It is very relevant as we are planting seeds. Hello. We are planting seeds as the season starts and begins. And so I'm going to pass it to Andrew to talk about seeds and planting stock. And he'll move through a few slides talking about kind of the more growing practices that we want to share with you that fully aligns with kind of questions asked in the OSP.
We're talking about seeds and planting stock. It's one of the components of that organic system plan. Starting to really get into, like, how do you grow? We've talked a little bit about what's the environment, and you're going to hear us talk a little bit about this throughout the presentation, is how are we maintaining and improving the soil and the farm space that we're really stewarding here at Rutgers Gardens. So, and it all starts from seed. We start everything that we grow from seed in our greenhouse. And when we're selecting those seeds, we're looking at a number of things, but the predominant thing that we're looking for is this seed organic or not? There's kind of a flow chart, like a yes or no. Is it organic? Yes, okay, we can use it. We'll talk a little bit more about some justifications for using non-certified organic seed and some examples. So predominantly we do use organic seeds, more than 90%. And if we were to plant something that was not from seed, it would be from organic cuttings, or we would buy nursery plants from organic sources. So there are actually nurseries that are growing plants organically, certified organic, for farms and gardeners to use throughout our region. And they deliver. It's very easy. And so we don't do as much of that, but in the future, maybe we would. Some considerations around how much time in the greenhouse do things take. As an example, a lot of farms buy in onion starts from a plant nursery. We actually start our onions from seed. You can actually see this picture here is, you see the small black seeds. Those are onion seeds. And so we start those early, around mid-February. Now, non-certified seed. And what's our justification for using them? Well, it's all about availability, right? Commercial availability. If, let's say that there's, you could buy 10 seeds, but it's going to cost you $10, $1 per seed. And you need 500 seeds. Well, it's probably not going to make a whole lot of sense for your farming operation to buy seed that's not really available commercially. Some plant varieties have a higher, more effective pest and disease package, meaning they are resistant to bacterial and fungal pathogens in the field. They are resistant to pests that may be looking for a food. And they might even be drought resistant or have other characteristics and qualities that make them a superior option to what is available organically. So I have a couple of examples here of some non-certified seed that we use, and I'll tell you a little bit about why we use them. Starting with the sun-gold tomatoes. Everyone loves sun-gold tomatoes. Superior quality, flavor. They are ubiquitous in our area. But what you may not know is that there is no commercially available cherry tomato seed of the sun-gold variety. And so that is what we want to grow. And so we do grow that because it's not commercially available organically. Same with the Hawkeye turnip. Sweet, small, white root become very, very popular in market gardens. And there's not really an alternative. So that is another variety that we use. This year we're actually trialing a new variety of peas, of sugar snap peas in the spring. It's called Super Sugar Snap. And that super actually means that it's exceptionally resistant to downy mildew, as well as other fungal pathogens and diseases that may occur in the field. In our region, over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot more humidity, a lot more moisture in that early part of the growing season. And the way to mitigate some of that risk of pathogens floating around, having that environment, finding a host, those pathogens, is actually to pick a variety that is a little bit more resistant for our region. So last year we had seen exceptional damage, and so we said this year we're going to try something new. And then finally, our last example is ginger. So we've grown ginger on the farm for 3+ seasons, and that might surprise you. Maybe you've heard more about how growers are actually having ginger be a part of their growing operation. However, it's still a pretty nascent industry in the United States, at least in our region in the Northeast. And so there really hasn't been much of a market for seed growers of ginger. They start as the rhizomes, propagated in a greenhouse, planted out when you get a shoot, or you can just plant directly into the ground. And so we'll talk a little bit more about who we work with and why, but the takeaway here is that we want to source everything for the farm organically if possible, and to trust where those inputs are being produced and how. So when we talk about organic seed, we're talking about seed from plants that are certified organic. So it's not just that the seed itself is certified organic through a process, it's actually the plants that come before them that are certified organic, and that's an important thing to know. The last thing I'll say here that's important about the seeds is that when we're looking for those varieties, we're not just looking in one place. We're looking in actually multiple places. So we look through multiple catalogs of vendors that we can buy from before choosing a non-certified organic variety. So some names that we use Johnny's, we use High Mowing Organic, and we use Fedco. And if we're not finding those organic varieties that are matching our needs for the field and for the people who rely on us to grow for them, then we will go with that potentially not non-certified variety. But of course, we're not just growing plants, we're growing soil. We are trying to create the optimal conditions for plants to thrive. About soil fertility and crop management. So on the farm, we really employ no-till permanent raised beds, meaning we don't bring a tractor and till everything up every year. We're trying to reduce compaction and really promote like natural ecological processes. So every time that even other certified organic farms, many of them don't do what we do. And in some ways, it's actually better for the ecology to work more closely with some of those natural occurrences in the soil and to not disturb those processes. However, as we employ a low-till approach, we do broad fork, which creates aeration and porosity in the soil to allow those roots to expand through and find nutrients and water. And we also add an organic slow-release fertilizer. It's a granular fertilizer. Actually, we have a label and some other materials that you can take a look at after the presentation. We'll pass it around now. So one thing you'll see on that label is it says OMRI approved, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. We also use cover crops to try and build the soil. Ideally, you're growing multiple different cover crops throughout the season. So it's not just a one and done. And there are different benefits that we may get into as well. Ultimately, what we're targeting, we're data driven. And so we're targeting really three main metrics: NPK, pH, and organic matter. NPK are macronutrients in the soil that occur at the 100 or usually 1,000 parts per million. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, elements that each have very vital roles in the production of crops on a farm, on any farm. For pH, for the diversified vegetables that we grow, we're looking at a range, and so we are within that range. If you ever hear about farmers or growers adding lime to their fields, that's to correct the pH to work within the range that's optimal for diversified vegetables. As well as organic matter. So as organic matter breaks down in the soil, it does some of that work of aeration and porosity. In addition to just providing the microbes that exist in the soil, necessary food and nourishment to survive. Somebody once said, if nothing's feeding the soil, it's going to eat itself. So you need to have all the nutrition available to have it be happy. And again, we're really having a holistic approach to soil and crop management that includes soil testing, observation, and promoting those natural ecological processes. So natural resource conservation. You know, we're a small farm. We have a small footprint, but at the end of the day, it's small changes that can really make a big impact. And so we're trying to do as much as we can to really steward the land in the most benevolent way possible. And sometimes you have to make some compromises and other consideration. We'll get into that too. I'm just going to talk about plastic versus plants. You know, a lot of farms on our scale use plastic. It's a great control. It's a physical barrier for weeds so that they can't come through. We tarp our fields in the winter for soil protection. So right now, as you look outside, you don't see that much snow anymore. But at one time, of course, there was plenty. And that snow doesn't really evaporate so much. It melts, right? And so when you have so much snow melting all at once, you're kind of creating some risk of nutrients washing out of the soil just with nowhere to go. And so that tarp helps preserve the beds from erosion through the winter season, as well as from kind of being saturated with moisture and running off some of those nutrients. At the same time, we're kind of probably moving towards a lesser reliance on plastic in general for reasons that we have, and that also for reasons that we don't know about, as we don't know so much about microplastics and how they occur and what the impact of them are. So living mulch is a great way. Basically, by having plants in the ground, we are ensuring that the soil is retaining its structure and that microbes are engaging around the root zone of the plants, and really having that microbial activity. Versus plastic, whereas plastic is a lot more about maintaining, having some living mulches are actually enhancing, and that's what organic is all about. And so water is obviously very important for farms. We're very fortunate to have a municipal water connection in our main field, meaning that we flip a switch and the water's flowing like a fire hose. So that's super helpful. That cuts out a lot of stress that growers around the world may have. And how are we going to get water? Even through a drought, we kind of have a lifeline, and that's very much appreciated. So we want to shout out that. But then it actually goes deeper than that. We use drip tape primarily on the farm to deliver the exact amount of water that we need for those plants to grow well. And really not much more than that. It's precise. It delivers it directly to the root zone, that water. And it actually helps a lot with mitigating disease, which we'll probably get into more. But the drip tape really is like a hyper efficient way for us to use only the amount of water that we really need. We do, especially when plants are established. And however, for other crops, particularly cover crops and other peak season crops, we do use some overhead irrigation, which kind of gets a nice even soak in the topsoil. Crop rotation. One thing you should know about our farm is that we are growing for market and donation-based partnerships in our New Brunswick and Rutgers community. And so we're really trying to grow as much as we can and really engage that soil as much as we can diversely. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We typically use like about a 2 or 3 year field rotation. So in a small space, we are moving around where we plant things from year to year. So a crop is never where it was in the exact same place the year before or 2 years before. We want to give that area some rest. However, we have to make some determinations and some compromises sometimes as to what level of risk are we willing to take in order for us to be able to grow at a scale that meets the needs of our community. So whereas we may not double crop from year to year kale and kale or tomatoes and tomatoes, we may pick from a different crop family to be next to each other from where it was the year before, only if we weren't seeing pest and disease pressure in that previous crop. So if we see pest and disease pressure on a crop that's significant and even if it doesn't affect the crop health that season, we know that if those fungal pathogens are on the plants, they can easily fall off, they stay on the soil, and that next year they can threaten our growing operations. So that's where observation really comes into play and knowing what your controls are. But what does help us are the diverse plant families that we grow. So instead of having a monoculture, we're actually seeing a lot more plant disease and a lot more plant insects, but at a much smaller volume, at a much smaller intensity because of that diversification. It's sort of a hedge against crop failure on a mass scale. To have all these different vegetables growing, they all have different, wants and needs. And so 2 of the crop families that we actually work with the most are our brassicas and our solanaceous crops. Brassica is also known as crucifers or cole crops. That's going to be your arugula, cabbage, kale, kohlrabi, radishes, and turnips. And really the list goes on. Mustard greens, collard greens, broccoli, cauliflower, as well as the solanaceous crops. Those are your tomatoes, your peppers, your eggplants, and your potatoes. And so we have to be really deliberate about where we plant those, how much we plant, and keeping some institutional knowledge from year to year about how those crops did. Brassicas can be affected heavily by aphids, and solanaceous crops can be affected heavily by fungal pathogens and bacterial diseases in the field, as well as pests like Colorado potato beetle and thrips. So trying to avoid planting again, really for as long as possible in those same areas if we're seeing those issues, because those can proliferate and wipe out a crop if allowed to. And the one bullet point I haven't talked about is succession cropping. So there are some things we only grow once, and it's in the ground the whole year. That's going to be your garlic, parsley, thyme. There are some things that we grow twice. Those are your tomatoes, eggplant, and fennel. Some things we grow 3 to 4 times. Those are your radishes, turnips, carrots, beets, your roots, and your cucurbits like cucumbers and squash, to try and get consistent availability throughout the growing season. So we see a harvest window of anywhere from anywhere from 3 weeks to 8 weeks, and we want to extend the season as much as possible to have things be available for our community. And then we have things that are going in the ground every week or every 2 weeks. That's your lettuce, dill, cilantro, quick greens. Those have a little bit less of a need for vigilant crop rotation, but if we're seeing a host of aphids on our lettuces, we're probably not going to plant lettuce or other aphid-sensitive crops there for a while. So it's all about kind of weighing based on the organic practices that are set out and the other observations that we're seeing to make those determinations on where to put things. So now we're going to talk a little bit about our crop, pest, weed, and disease management. So the number one thing that I think an aspiring grower needs to know on this topic is that the weather affects the timing of everything, of when you can get into the field and prep, when you want to plant, when you want to weed, when you want to harvest, when you want to maybe spray an organic pesticide. If it's real sunny, sometimes that chemical or that organic derivative can actually interact with the UV and the sun in a way that can be detrimental to the foliage that's being sprayed. And sometimes if it's going to rain, then that pesticide or that other control or fertilizer is more susceptible to running off or may just otherwise be less effective for the crop. And so it depends on what you're doing. So you're going to want to consult an IPM specialist through your extension service about that, with the growing risk of our warming climate and the unpredictability of our weather. However, for for weed management, we're using a lot of hand tools. So we brought in a couple today that I'm not going to pull aside right now. We can take a look afterwards. We have a couple of small hand tools. We have a common hoe. We have a digging fork. So we're using that primarily to disrupt or disturb or otherwise terminate any weeds that we're seeing in the field. We're also using a leaf mulch. It's essentially a composted leaf product that contains no manure. And so it's very suitable for just providing a nice mat. It's non-plastic to serve as a physical barrier. Also on the note of physical barriers, we employ insect netting as a deterrent for pests so that they can't get to that food source. You can kind of see in a picture, here's kind of an example of what that can look like. Netting is used in the field sometimes for adding a few extra degrees, like a kind of a blanket or a warming fabric on top of a plant to extend the season, or for that physical barrier to keep those pests out. But we're scouting and monitoring as needed and on a weekly basis for insects, plants, and other environmental concerns. And then when we see something out there, we're like, okay, we got to do something about it, or not do something about it. And so we're employing chemical, cultural, and biological methods. An example of a chemical control is your organic pesticide. Organic pesticides are substances that are derived from organic plant or insect material to serve as a deterrent or otherwise a treatment for pests when you have them, preventatively or curatively, and there's kind of a whole host of options. Not as much as in the non-organic industry. They're using all sorts of scary chemicals that we completely avoid and would never want to use. But we think if things are happening in nature, kind of abiding by those natural ecological processes, then it must be sustainable. A cultural control may be when we're out picking tomatoes, not harvesting from a hot spot of disease. If you're like, oh, those 10 plants look rough. Like, I don't want to go near those because I know that I'm just going to spread whatever disease is on there to the rest of the crop. And so we call those hot spots. Another example of a cultural method may be actually physical removal of pests or plants that are showing signs of pest or disease to try and isolate and eradicate from the source and stop it kind of small before it becomes a bigger problem. And a biological control is, for example, encouraging some pest predators to come out to the farm and hang out and have a picnic with some of the pests that we're seeing on the farm. And just that is something that we're going to talk a bit more about.
Piece that we wanted to kind of switch gears from talking about more our practices is more what happens off farm and the things that set us up. So the OSP is going to have some strategies or questions more really to learn our strategies on how we do prevention of contamination. This is more talking about things that are on site like lumber. So we have split rail fences. We have new fence that was built several years ago on the farm, making sure that any material that's brought onto the farm that may have contact with the soil that could affect our growing areas is not treated with anything that we do not want. So there's several questions in the OSP that you might see that will ask about that. So we do have the benefit that we can pretty much say with confidence we don't have any treated lumber. We're not using anything in the farm that is going to create a problem like that. We also have separated storage for our farm inputs and supplies. Right now that's not too much, right? And so but everything is labeled. I mentioned at the beginning we have other entities within Rutgers Gardens. We have our horticulture team. We have researchers that are coming here. We have other growers and people that are here. And so we are going to make sure that we're employing more strategies for our organic certification that label clearly that this is an organic input. It's meant for the student farm. And so that everyone has that clear communication. This image is just an example of bins that we have so what we store our produce in. We share a cooler in our season with the Are You Ready to Farm program. And so there's some participants from that program here. That's how we met Eva. And so we make sure that we're labeling, and we're going to be labeling now as organic, and that the Are You Ready to Farm program, their bins are separate. So we want to make sure that they're not cross-contaminating. Even though they're using organic practices, their field will not be certified organic. So that is important. It's going to be part of what our audit is going to look like. The inspector will want to see those shared spaces and make sure everything is labeled properly. And this also helps just on any scale that you're growing. Make sure you label and date things. You're not going to remember when you picked those beets or whatever it was. We're going to also be weighing our produce. And so that's going to be going on our label. Other things to talk about in terms of commingling and contaminations, any shared equipment. The major piece of equipment that we do share on our farm with our horticulture team is a tractor. So the picture is there. And so we're going to employ a cleaning strategy so that the tires and things are clean. So in case it was running over any treated areas of the garden on grass or anything like that, when it's going onto the farm, it's clean. And so we want to make sure we can show proof of that. So that's part of our process for documenting when and how often we're cleaning our supplies and our equipment. And then the other piece, wash pack. And so mainly we are the only ones utilizing some of those spaces like our wash pack, so we don't have to worry too much about that cross-contamination. But we'll make sure that we have a good system in place. We're educating students and those who are on farm with us. Pass back to Andrew, just talk about our fraud prevention plan, and then we'll talk about record keeping.
Yeah, so we're going to kind of talk about the section of the OSP of the Organic System Plan that's called Fraud Prevention Plan. And no, we're not selling insurance. This is more about how can we prove that everything we're doing is compliant with the National Organic Program. So it starts with doing our best to ethically source all of our inputs and making sure that they're either food grade or OMRI approved. Food grade on the market side, and OMRI approved in the field. Whenever we're buying something new, we're doing diligent research to make sure that what we're going to be trying or what we're going to be using is organic, that it abides by organic standards. So for example, actually last season, we were like, we have a pest in our cabbage. And so we wanted to know like what that pest was. And so we put some sticky traps out there, not to kill every single last fly that was buzzing around, but just to be able to know, okay, what is the prevalence of that pest in our fields, and is it actually there? Shout out to Dan Jacobs.
It was there. There were a lot of them.
It was there. Altogether, we're really working with people that we trust across the supply chain. So as a farm, we consider ourselves a producer, but really we're using a lot of goods that are coming in from, externally, that are manufactured elsewhere, whether it's the seeds, equipment, pesticides, and other supplies. And so we need to know not just that people are saying something, but that they can actually prove it. And so here we have a certification from Johnny's Selected Seeds, where we buy many of our seeds, and they have a certification for all of their seeds that are organic through the Maine certifying agency, the agency out of the state of Maine. And so that's kind of a way to signal to us, okay, you're not just saying you're organic, you are certified through the USDA.
One of our last slides just talking about the OSP. So record keeping, you might have seen that we talk about all of these practices, but major part of OSP and the paperwork, a lot of farmers that we've talked to that say they don't want certification is because there's a lot of paperwork. It is. You have to have a paper trail for pretty much everything you do on farm, from seed to sale. And so we are going to be having this benefit of the records that we've kept over the years, but this year we will be doing more. And so that allows us to keep track of our harvest. We were weighing all of our produce that we donate. Most of that goes to the Basic Needs Center on campus and then to a Middlesex County food pantry. And we are going to be weighing all of our produce that comes out of the field now. It's going to benefit us to keep track of our yields and actually understand a little more of our growing practices, but it means that we will have that log of everything that we harvest coming from the field. So when it goes to the cooler, before it goes to the cooler, it will be weighed. So that means it's washed, it's weighed, and then goes into the cooler. And so this system and keeping that on a harvest log, it will be a journal likely for the week, and then we'll input that into a spreadsheet that we have for our record keeping purposes that we can pull up every time we have an audit or an inspection. The same goes with invoices and receipts. So any of our purchasing, we're keeping track of that so that we have that paper trail. The two audits that we will be preparing for it this year and then every year whenever we have a certification, so that mass balance and the trace back. So a mass balance is actually making sure your inputs account for your outputs. So if you only bought, a couple hundred seeds, but you are saying that you sold hundreds and thousands of carrots or pounds, I keep using carrots as an example, but they have to make sure it matches, right? So if you're actually not able to show that proof, there's going to be some questions from the inspector. And then the trace back is the record keeping audit trail for all crops. And so that's your invoices, your harvest log, all of the materials that we'll be collecting over time that they'll look at to see, where did you sell this? Where was it grown? They want to have some plot. If we don't have numbers on our plots, they want to know what we call it. And so that's where our maps also come in handy here. And this is just like a snapshot of some of our crop record that we have of onions that we planted, how much we seeded, the date that we actually planted it, and then we would be filling in the actual day of first harvest, the total harvested weight, and then the date of our last harvest. And that's going to inform our planning for also years in the future of knowing, oh, when did we actually what was our last harvest date this year? So that will inform our practices. So it's going to be to our benefit. It's just getting used to this new system of having just a bit more careful care of our paper trail. And hopefully it's worth it so we can teach others and help them be set up for success to keep track of all those things. And there is a great record keeping video. It's about 10 or 11 minutes from Cabbage Throw Farm. They're an certified organic farm. They come to our Cook's Market in the past, and they were a speaker at a previous TOPP workshop. So if you want to check that out, it's also on our TOPP website that you can check out how they do their record keeping, which is really great. Okay. The last slide here on the OSP is marketing and labeling. So of course, becoming certified organic gives you this benefit. You get to have the USDA organic seal on there. For some markets, we likely will have just a new sign. So we're going to have something that allows our customers, people who are shopping, to know that we're now certified organic. We're not going to have necessarily extra labeling or stickers on any of our produce. We don't do that now because we're mainly direct to consumer. And maybe that's marketing and ways that we engage with our partners. We're starting to sell in a small amount to Are You Dining at Harvest Cafe on campus. So for example, we may be able to update a sign that shows that our produce is not only from the Rutgers Student Farm grown there, but it is certified organic. And it just helps with our education to the public about what we do. And then it's just building that trust. I mentioned, I think earlier, someone's coming to the market, a super long line. They don't have to ask us the question, are you organic? They'll see the label, they'll see the sign, and they'll have that trust. And then they can ask us, something else. How do I come? Do you pick your own? Do you grow XYZ? And trying to get more engaging questions, and that the organic is kind of understood now. There are some other certifies that are out there. We've been to some conferences and meetings. There's farmers that work with certified biodynamic, certified naturally grown. The Real Organic Project is a big movement in our country and possibly beyond. And then regenerative organic. So there's lots of different labels, and you'll see them in the grocery store, right, on products that you buy. But USD Organic has had the kind of most stringent, I guess, of regulations, and there's more of that consumer trust, but it doesn't mean that any of those are not valuable. We are pursuing right now the USD Organic, but the Real Organic Project has kind of moved beyond that. They think there should be more to be done to making sure your farm is certified organic. So just to put it out there that there's other certifications. This is not the only one that you may see farmers at the farmers market that are talking about or have displays on. So. And speaking of other farmers, unless there's other questions about kind of marketing, we're open to ideas and moras in the room of how we let people know that we're certified organic. But some of our last information that we want to share with you is a summary of best practices. We talked to about 6 different farmers and growers recently in the past month or so, and they've shared with us some of their best practices. Not all of them were certified organic, and they varied from, I think, 40 or 60 acres to, half an acre. And so a very wide breadth of different farm sizes that people are growing on. And the main pieces that I wanted to pull out are here on the slide. The first was to have a business plan. This was stressed by many farmers, that to actually understand, is your farm going to be economically viable? And so if you don't have a business plan, create one, was the suggestion. And then we're adding here to have an organic system plan. If you're looking to become a certified organic, you want to start working through this so that you know. The one piece I didn't mention is that just to get certified organic, you need to prove that you've had 3 years of production with no synthetic inputs or prohibited materials. So we had the benefit of the farm of, we've been growing organically since our inception. So cover crop use was mentioned a lot, often multiple at once. And so really diversifying that cover crop use, especially at the end of the season as a winter kill crop that, will just die back in the winter. We're talking about how we can employ that more for our fall season this year and into the winter. And so cover crops were mentioned, and just taking care of the soil. That is the main priority of what we're doing here as farmers, as organic farmers and growers, is healthy soil has to be the priority. The other piece was farming is the easy part. Selling your product is the hardest part. And so knowing your markets, we really heard that from a lot of growers and farmers, that you need to know where you're selling your product to, because that can be the hardest part. If you have one of the farmers talked to, he grew $4,000 worth of produce one year and he only sold $400 or whatever it was that year. So you have to understand where your market was. That was his first year, and now he is wildly successful. But you learn from that, but it's helpful to know your market so that you can market and sell your produce that you actually grow. And then the last piece I'll mention is just organic certification can be a tool. And I mentioned those other certifying entities that are out there. It can be a tool to help you with your markets and finding the people that want to buy your product, but it can also be for education. It can be for a lot of different reasons, and you use it for your advantage to be a tool for your farm, just like you have in your back pocket other resources and things that you use in general for your management. So I don't know if we have time for much more on that, but if you have questions, we're going to put out a best practices article. Actually, I'll go back to it. So you'll see an article. You'll be joining, I hope, if you're not already, our TOPP newsletter series this winter. We'll be wrapping up at the end of this month, and then hopefully to stay in touch with you all. But we'll send out that kind of formal written document about what we learned from all those farmers. And then finally, I have some recommended resources, some of the things we mentioned. The Mid-Atlantic Commercial Vegetable Production Recommendation Guide, the one that you can find right now online for free. If you just research, Google that, you'll find it. But there is a 2026 version. And so we don't have that hard copy right now, but you can find the 2024, 2025 version. And it's not for backyard growers, though. This is for like commercial production. Rutgers Cooperative Extension, of course, the New Jersey State Agriculture Development Committee. If you don't know NOFA New Jersey, definitely connect with them. They have lots of free offerings. They have virtual and in-person workshops, classes, meetups. There's a monthly last Wednesday of the month. I think it's like a monthly open kind of house virtual conversation. And then what we've been mentioning a lot is OMRI. So if you want to check out or if you're in doubt of a product, you can find the Organic Materials Review Institute. That's OMRI. What is actually OMRI certified or not, and that will help you inform kind of your purchases for your farm or your garden, that it's organic, and you can have that knowledge with confidence. So thank you all so much. These are some of the acknowledgments I wanted to make. NOFA New Jersey's on there, PCO, the Pennsylvania Certified Organization, or Pennsylvania Certified Organic. Rodale Institute, we just started consulting with them. They do free consulting for farmers and who are looking to get certified, and they have an amazing operation. And so we've been linked up with a consultant from there. The TOPP program, and then of course thank you to all of our students and our staff, people who are in this room and beyond. Thank you so much. Yeah, we appreciate it.